folks, how we doing? It's James, JT at the movies, and we are back for episode 15. Can you believe it? Episode 15 of Debriefing 007. And we're going to take a look today at the first of the Timothy Dalton movies, my favourite James Bond. And we're going to take a look at 1987's The Living Daylights. So this film came out in 1987, and as I just mentioned, is the first film, one of two films to star Timothy Dalton as James Bond 007. Now, Dalton is my favourite James Bond overall. He was the first Bond that I ever really sort of connected with and found myself enjoying the films, and actually found that my passion and my love for the series came from watching Dalton's two films and then going back and being able to appreciate the other films in the series as having those films as a jumping off point, if that makes sense. Now, it nearly wasn't Tim Dalton that was going to be in this role. In fact, he came on board right at the 11th hour, really. He was first approached to play the role way back in 1968 was Timothy Dalton, after Sean Connery swore that he'd never play the role again, and of course we all know how that turned out. But at the time, Dalton was around 25, 26 and felt that he was about 10 years too young to play the role and didn't have enough life experience or sort of be, the right sort of age that the character needed to be. So he politely declined, and of course we got George Lazenby on Her Majesty's Secret Service. But Dalton was always somebody that was in Cubby Broccoli's eye whenever they were looking to recast Bond, and there were a few times during the 70s and the early 80s when Roger Moore wasn't sure whether he was going to continue on as James Bond. They actually looked at Dalton after For Your Eyes Only to take over for Octopussy, and then again in View to a Kill, and then of course for this one as well. When they initially approached Dalton to star in Living Daylights, he was working on another film, a film called Brenda Starr at the time, and the two schedules would have clashed, meaning that Dalton was unable to commit to the film. Unable to wait at the time, Cubby Broccoli and the production team decided to press ahead with looking for another James Bond. They screen tested Sam Neill, who nearly got the part. There was everybody in the production team on board with having Sam Neill as the next James Bond, but Cubby Broccoli thought that he wasn't just right, and so they decided at the last minute to skip him. They then screen tested an actor that would go on to make 007 history, Pierce Brosnan. He passed the screen test with flying colours. Director John Glenn cut the test together and screened it for Cubby Broccoli in their private theatre, and he loved it. And then as soon as Brosnan was offered the part, a 60-day renewal option on his hit American TV show Remington Steele, where he played a similar sort of suave character and really was the sort of the inspiration behind his casting, was renewed at the last minute on something like the 56th day of the 60-day renewal window, and it meant that he would have to then go and complete another season of Remington Steele. Cubby Broccoli wasn't prepared to wait, and nor was he prepared to have the title character also be tied in with the title character of another film or series. By the time that all this had gone on, Dalton's schedule had actually freed up. He finished work on the film Brenda Starr, and he literally goes so far as to say in one of the DVD commentaries that he finished the work on Brenda Starr on the Saturday, flew back to England on the Sunday, and began shooting Living Daylights on the Monday. It really, really was a quick turnaround. And whilst the writers were writing the script for this film, they were not really sure what kind of a Bond they were writing for, and so they kept it fairly generic and then went back and tailored the script once they realised that Dalton was going to lean more into Ian Fleming's original work. In fact, Dalton said for both films that on regularly in between takes on set he would be reading Fleming's works to make sure that he was bringing a portrayal of the character to the screen that Ian Fleming would have been proud of. That's something I think I can largely agree with, to be fair. Having read the books myself, both the Fleming ones and not all of them, but a handful of the ones that have been done by his various successors. And I would say that Dalton does really bring something Fleming-esque to it. And whenever I do read the books, even if I'm reading ones where Connery starred in it or Moore or Lazenby, when I read the books, it's Dalton that I picture, and I think that he just absolutely is note perfect as James Bond. There are a few things with this film where there are definitely some tweaks that need to be made, and I think with Licence to Kill they got it better, and had he stayed on to have done, I think, what was going to be Property of a Lady in the early 90s, or even GoldenEye, he would have gone on to be cemented as one of the best Bonds. But you can tell some of the hangovers from the Roger Moore era and where they thought they were writing for Pierce Brosnan, like the scene where they're going through the Alps and the car's got all the gadgets, and Kara's sort of, oh, what's that and what's this, and he's, salt corrosion, and you can just hear hear Roger Moore saying it, can't you? And they wisely cut a scene in Tangier where Bond's making an escape after the assassination of Pushkin, and there was a scene cut where he's going down telegraph poles and the wires connecting them on a rug that he's swiped off somebody's washing line, and it was meant to look like a magic carpet ride. And of course that would be right at home in a Roger Moore James Bond film, but with the tone set by this film and the way that Dalton's played it, it really feels like a real Cold War thriller, and it would have just been right out of left field and really taken you out of the action. So I'm so glad that the producers decided to really lean into what Dalton was bringing to the role, rather than just try and make him a carbon copy of Roger Moore, or make him make the film that was written for Pierce Brosnan. Let's jump into talking a bit about the plot of the film. So in the pre-title sequence, we see 007 and some other 00s doing a training exercise on the Rock of Gibraltar, where they've got to infiltrate the SAS base there without being sort of apprehended by the SAS on guard, and it's there that mission goes wrong, and there is actually a Soviet agent there, or what we believe to be a Soviet agent there, that kills two of the other 00s, and then Bond ends up in a battle with them, ultimately killing them. But it's there that we learn that the Russians have reinstated a Soviet directive called Smерть, which means death to spies, and is a callback to as the film tells us, the Stalin regime. After the fantastic title sequence by Maurice Binder, one of his last ones, and the great song as well by Aha, that I just love the 80s Bond themes, they're all great. But anyway, after that fantastic title sequence, we catch up with Bond in Czechoslovakia, where he's meeting with Head of Station Saunders, who is there to help Bond aid General Koskov, who is one of this film's leading villains, although we don't know it yet, in his defection to the West. So they're at the opera, and they're watching a piece of classical music performed. Bond, of course, being Bond, takes note of Kara, who's the cellist, and then Saunders is like, no, come on, keep your mind on the job, sort of thing. Anyway, Koskov gets out, and it's soon revealed that Kara is actually a sniper that's been sent to kill him. Bond's not really sure that that's quite right and thinks that there's something afoot, and so he takes over the operation from Saunders, and with a little bit of help from Q, helps Koskov to defect to the West, but doesn't kill the sniper, which has been his directive from M. He only wounds her, as he doesn't believe that she is a Russian sniper, and he's not too sure what's going on, but gets Koskov back to the West so that he can find out what's going on. Then back in the UK, Koskov has been debriefed by M and the Minister of Defence, Frederick Grey, and of course James Bond as well, in one of the MI6 safe houses. At that point, one of the other film's villains, Necros, who's sort of probably the henchman of this piece, turns up and infiltrates the compound as a milkman, and then starts to one by one kill the agents, and posing it as a gas leak, throws grenades around the house, sort of making explosions so that they evacuate. He then changes costume, posing as a doctor, and then captures Koskov, taking him out as though he's been wounded, and he's taking him for medical attention. So the British then think that the KGB have managed to infiltrate their secure safe house and catch Koskov and take him back to Moscow mere days after he's defected to the West, and they're the laughingstock of the intelligence community, as it's said in the film. After Koskov's capture by the KGB, M then gives Bond the mission of assassinating General Pushkin, played in this film by John Rhys Davies, who is the new head of the KGB and has succeeded General Gogol, played by Walter Gotell in all the previous Roger Moore films. During the debriefing scene, Koskov has managed to convince the British government that it's General Pushkin that's reinstated the directive Smерть and is the one that wants to bring about death to spies in the West. M can't quite believe it, and neither can Bond, but M ultimately sends Bond on the mission to kill him. Bond tries to talk M out of it, but M says, if you're not going to do it, I'll put 008 on it, and he'll just follow the orders. So Bond agrees to do it, but then sneakily gets Moneypenny to get him a sort of a roundabout trip to go back via Czechoslovakia and Vienna to be able to try and investigate more what was going on with the cellist. Once Bond arrives back in Czechoslovakia, he's quite easily able to track down Kara, this film's leading lady, the cellist from the beginning of the film that was the fake sniper. And after seeing her being captured by the KGB and General Pushkin himself, he soon then meets up with her, posing as a friend of Georgy Koskov's, letting her know that he's there to help her. She reveals that the defection was in fact a set-up and a fake, and was merely a ruse for Koskov's wider plan, which we learn about as the film goes on. So Bond, posing as Koskov's friend, agrees to help get Kara out of the country. They then go to Vienna, where Bond meets up again with Saunders, who gives him some papers so that they can get Kara out of the country. story. Saunders is unfortunately killed by Necros in a quite a sort of an action-packed scene in a fun fair, and it was really good. I absolutely love the way that scene plays, where Bond turns up at the hotel, and the guy at the hotel does the whole, Mr. Bond, your usual suite, and no, not tonight, Hans, we need something with a second bedroom, and then he buys her the dress, and they go to the opera again, and he's having a real night, and you feel the romance sort of blossoming between them, and this sort of connection building. Bond's obviously starting to fall for her, and she's obviously starting to fall for Bond as well. All the while Saunders is doing the running around in the background, doing the digging out and finding out where sort of everybody fits into the pieces of the puzzle, as it were. As I say, Saunders is killed by Necros in a scene that's really action-packed, and Dalton really shows what a menacing Bond he can be in this scene, and shows just what a vulnerable, tortured soul he is, which is really something that's just right out of Fleming, and I absolutely love this performance in this film. Separately to Bond's story in Vienna, we then see General Pushkin meeting up with the film's other lead villain, Brad Whitaker, who is played by Joe Don Baker, and he's incredibly miscast in this. Keen Bond fans will probably know that Joe Don returns to the series later on to play Bond ally and CIA agent Jack Wade, and that is a character he is much better suited to. But in this, he falls a bit flat as the villain, I'm afraid, and that is one of my critiques of the film, and I think is probably one of most people's sort of flaws and critiques with it, if you like. But it turns out that through Koskov, Whitaker is supposed to be supplying the KGB with new and upcoming arms, sort of like the best of the best, to help with the Russian fighting efforts in Afghanistan that were going on at the time, which I believe is something that was going on in the real world at the time. And this is something that the Bond series does from time to time. It pulls on real world events and lets that influence what's going on, like Man with the Golden Gun did with the solar energy crisis and things like that. And that's a whole other video in and of itself, isn't it? But Pushkin, realising that there's something not quite right, and goes to Whitaker to call the whole thing off. Whitaker tries to sort of talk him out of it. No, come on, I've, letters of credit, and, you can't just back out of a deal this big. But Pushkin ultimately threatens him. Whitaker's obviously unnerved, and then goes to speak to Koskov, who is actually there at the lovely complex that they have in Tangiers with Necros. And the three of them have a meeting, and Koskov confirms and reassures them that James Bond believes the defection story and will kill Pushkin in the coming days, and so they've nothing to worry about. But Whitaker's not so sure and says, just to be safe, Necros, you need to go out, you need to follow Pushkin, and if Bond doesn't pull the trigger, then you do. Bond then goes to meet up with Pushkin in Tangiers and reveals that he knows what's going on with Koskov and that he has a directive to kill him from the British government, but that he doesn't want to do that because he doesn't believe the story that Koskov set up. So the pair of them team up and stage an execution to make Koskov believe that Pushkin is dead, so that he will carry on with the next step of his plans. Bond and Pushkin then carry out the staged assassination, which is caught on TV. Whitaker and Koskov are over the moon that Bond has believed their story, and then they move on with the next part of their plan, and that's where the film sort of shifts gear a bit, really. Kara is sick and tired of Bond sort of saying, oh, well, we'll catch up with Yorgi in the next city or the next country, which is basically what he's been doing to sort of keep her stringing along with him to get the information that he needs. And she actually rings him on a number that she has for him at Brad Whitaker's complex. Whitaker is confused because obviously he's expecting her to be dead, because they believe that she's been killed in the opening sequence of the film where she was the sniper. Realising that there's more at stake, Koskov convinces Kara that Bond is actually the double agent and that he's the good guy, and that she needs to drug Bond so that him and Necros can come and take care of him, and sort of make sure that everything's all wrapped up. So she does that, and then when Bond confides in her the reason that he is actually a British agent, and he knows that the reason she's got a scar on her arm is because he's the one that gave it to her, she realises, oh god, I've made a terrible mistake. But it's too late. Bond's drugged and the pair of them are kidnapped by Koskov and Necros. Now, I really, really like Koskov as a villain in this film. He's really slimy, and he does suffer from being sort of a little bit forgetful when you look at some of the other Bond villains that have gone by. Your Goldfingers, your Blofelds, your Hugo Draxes, your Jaws. He falls into that similar sort of Dominic Green, sort of Kamal Khan, sort of, could be in the real world sort of thing, and isn't too sort of exaggerated or extravagant in terms of his performance. And whilst it's a fantastic performance from Jeroen Krabbe, I just feel that he sort of gets a little bit forgotten, and it's a real shame that there isn't quite, more of a menacing main villain sort of thing. I think they really should have lent into either Whittaker or Koskov being an absolute psychotic and a bigger-than-life Bond villain. I think that would have really upped the stakes in this film. Bond, Koskov and Kara arrive at a Russian airbase in Afghanistan. It's there that Bond is taken off to prison, and Kara, believing that she's going to go away with Koskov and escape later, is actually then also taken to prison as well, showing that Koskov has fully betrayed Kara. She slaps him and then fully realises that actually Bond's the good guy, and that Koskov really isn't a bloke to be to be associated with, sort of thing. In an action-packed and slightly comedic sequence in the prison on the airbase, Bond and Kara manage to escape, and they are aided by one of this film's other allies, Cameron Shah, who is the leader of the east section of the Mujahideen, which is the Afghan resistance, and he is played wonderfully by Art Malik, and I just don't think we see enough of Art Malik in films. He's great. I love it whenever he turns up. This one and True Lies being the ones that immediately come to mind, but he's rocked up in things like Doctor Who over the years and on all sorts of things, and he's just always a great presence whenever he's on screen, and he's fantastic. He's sort of playing a normal sort of farmer type that's just sort of caught up in it when he's in prison, and he really keeps up to the whole ruse that he doesn't know what's going on, and then literally the minute they're out, switches it on a dime, and he's this amazingly well-educated man, and a great fighter and a great leader, and it's just a really, really cool character. I really, really have always liked that character. So they go back to the Mujahideen base, having escaped the Russian airbase, and Bond says that he needs to take some men and some guns so that he can go and storm the airbase and catch Koskov. Initially, Cameron Shah refuses that, but says that Bond and Kara can accompany him on a mission that they have the next morning, and that they'll go from there. So the next morning, whilst on that mission, Bond learns that the Russians are being supplied by the Mujahideen with opium. Cameron saying, "I don't care whether they die from the bullets or the opium," and that's a really sort of good way to look at it, isn't it? I suppose, because he's managing to finance by selling the opium, managing to finance his resistance, and just thought it was a clever little sort of way, and ultimately either way, like I say, it's going to kill them one way or the other, isn't it? And then Bond, sort of on the back of that, realises what Koskov's plan is. They're going to use the embezzled money from the Soviet Union to buy the drugs, sell it back, make a markup, still be able to complete the arms orders that they've got, and then make a profit on the back of it as well, and still have the money. So they get the money and they get the sales, and best of both worlds is ultimately the villain's scheme of this film. Bond manages to convince Cameron to let him blow up the opium once he's been paid for it, of course, to make sure that Cameron's not at a disadvantage. But during all the commotion, Koskov realises that Bond and Kara are there, and it's there really that the third act sort of battle commences, and there's all sorts of chaos, and it ends with Bond and Necros on the plane full of the opium, full of the heroin, fighting, and in a scene that's a little bit similar to the climax of Octopussy, Necros falls from the plane to his death. After the fight with Necros, Bond then manages to escape with Kara from the plane in a jeep that they drive out the back of it in a cool little stunt whilst the plane crashes. And I really just want to call out all the miniature effects work going on here, and all the practical effects that they're doing to make this. As well as watching the film, watch the Inside documentary that's on all the Blu-rays and the DVDs that have come out over the years. And if you haven't watched that as a Bond fan, I would recommend it. And it's amazing, like the miniature work that's gone on, like, foreground projection and all that sort of stuff, and like forced perspective stuff going on with something that's like 1 to 300 the scale of what it would actually be. And then there's a scene where they do like a quarter scale bridge for when they blow it up at the end, and it's amazing because it's done on pine wood on the back lot, and instead of like the river underneath it, they've put like cling film on the floor and a little bit of water on top, and it's using miniatures. And then, like I said, there's another one where they're sort of making it look like something's driving over a bridge, but it's a forced perspective thing with a really small bridge, and then everyone's driving along in the distance. It's fantastic stuff, and it really holds up well on the Blu-ray as well. That's obviously what I watch all these on. And a lot of the time when you watch some of these older films, because it's coming up 35 years old now, is this film, the sort of the practical effects that they had at the time can really show, and you can see the strings, and you can see where the backgrounds are blurred and things like that. But no, it really works well. And then for the final scene of the film, Bond heads back to Tangier, and with a little bit of help from Felix Leiter, who does have a small appearance earlier in this film, and it's really forgettable, to be right honest. There's a guy called John Terry playing him, and he's just unfortunately, I'm not seeing him in anything else, so I can't comment on his acting overall, but in this he's really forgettable and quite wooden, and he's probably the worst Felix since the guy we had in Diamonds Are Forever. But anyway, with a little bit of help from Felix over an intercom, Bond manages to infiltrate Whittaker, and after a quick and a little bit silly of an end battle, Whittaker is ultimately killed by one of Q's gadgets, which is an exploding keyring. It blows a statue up, knocks him over and crushes him. Pushkin then enters the room with Bond with all his Russian soldiers, at which point Koskov comes running in, pretending that he's been a hostage of Whittaker's all this time. And I love this scene. It's absolutely fantastic. John Rhys-Davies is brilliant, and obviously again so is Jeroen Krabbe, and he's, you know, John Rhys-Davies is greeting him with open arms. Yorgi, 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 come here, and, you know, and they're sort of, you know, laughing and joking with each other, and, you know, he's, don't you worry, I'll put you on the first flight back to Moscow. And then he turns to, like, his head soldier, put him in the diplomatic bag, and it's just so sinister. It's one of the few times that a lead Bond villain isn't killed on screen, but you know that whatever's happened, whether he's been sent to like a Siberian jail, or whether he's going back to be shot and executed, or whatever it is, his fate is much worse than Bond just killing him, sort of thing. And it's brilliant, the look of terror that comes over Koskov's face as he realises that he's been found out and led off. And then we get a nice little coda at the end of the film where Kara's involvement has sort of all been forgiven, and, you know, the Russians accept that she's been sort of caught up in basically Koskov's scheme and had really nothing to do with it. She is now on a world tour playing classical music as the lead cellist in an orchestra, and all the MI6 regulars are there. You've got M, and General Gogol makes a cameo appearance as well, which is really, really nice, and sort of a link back to the Roger Moore era of films, and confirms that she's got an immigration visa so that she can come and go from Russia as she pleases to tour around the world, which is ultimately what all she's ever wanted to do. She is a musician. She's not a soldier or involved in the action really in any way, other than the fact that she was in a relationship with Koskov and then got, you know, involved in this mission with Bond. There's a comedic scene then where Cameron Shah turns up and apologises that he's missed the performance, but they'd had some trouble at the airport, and all his guards are in their sort of their soldiers' gear with bullets over them, and M's like, well, I can't imagine why you had trouble, sort of thing, you know. And it's a silly little sort of laugh out loud moment. But Bond is unfortunately on a mission and missed the performance, so she's sad. She excuses herself, but of course Bond isn't on mission. He's snuck away. He's in the dressing room waiting for her, and then the credits roll as Bond and Kara share that intimate moment, and James Bond will return. So there we are, folks. That has been my thoughts on The Living Daylights. I really do enjoy this film. I think where it sort of suffers for me is the villains. I think that a strong lead villain in this film is what's lacking. I think that the Cold War story and the arms deals and the drug smuggling and all that sort of thing, and it all been quite intricate how it works. I think that's great. I think it's largely believable, and it's something that you could expect real world spies to possibly be dealing with, or at least like the governments and special forces and things like that. And that all feels believable. Dalton is no perfect in all the really serious scenes and the action scenes. I want to mention as well that he does a lot of his own stunts in this. I still think that really, as well as the villains sort of not being as strong as they could, the hang-ups are maybe some of where they've tried to insert little bits of humour, and you can tell that it was written for Roger Moore, maybe Pierce Brosnan, like the salt corrosion scene and things like that. There's when he's just killed Necros, I gave him the boot. You can see Roger Moore saying that, but it feels really forced when it's coming out of Dalton's mouth, and I think that's something that they get better in License to Kill. But that really is my only criticism of the film. I think that the leading lady, Mariam Darbo, playing Cara Milovi, is absolutely fantastic. As I say, Pushkin, played by John Rhys-Davies, is fantastic. The MI6 regulars, Q and M, are great. The new Moneypenny's a bit wooden. Obviously, they retired Lois Maxwell after the last one, and this Moneypenny just doesn't have the rapport with Dalton that Lois Maxwell managed to have with the previous three Bonds, and I think that they got it right when they recast her again for GoldenEye and got Samantha Bond into play. She managed to capture some of that spark again. But yes, Caroline Bliss doesn't quite live up to the money, but at least they kept Q. Like I say, Jeroen Krabbe's performance is great, and I just really wish that they'd picked either somebody better cast to play Whittaker, or made that character more scary and given Joe Don Baker more to do with it, more menacing. And then I think that, Koskov as almost like a secondary villain and a more human villain, as it were, would have worked quite well. That's my thoughts on it. I've always preferred License to Kill to this film, but I do really enjoy this one, and this is one that I come back to regularly, probably once a year at least, which for me is quite regularly. But like I say, I've always preferred License to Kill to this one, and I think if I were rating this out of 10, I'd have to look at it both with the objectivity of how good the actual film is, and also the subjectivity of is my favourite Bond, and it's only one of 2 adventures that we got with him, and I think when I look at that, I'd have to give this a 7.5 out of 10. So there we are, folks. That has been my thoughts, my ramblings, if you like, on 1987's The Living Daylights, the 15th James Bond adventure, the first starring Timothy Dalton. Let me know your thoughts on this film down below in the comments. I'd really love to have a natter with you about it, and I always love reading your guys' comments and thoughts. Absolutely brilliant. If you've liked this video, leave it a thumbs up. Let YouTube and me know that you like this sort of video when it comes out. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please think about doing so. It helps the channel to grow. And I really love it when you guys stick around for more. Above all else, folks, as I always say, take care of yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you again next time when we take a look at 1989's License to Kill.